Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Empowered Chat about cyber insurance with K through 12 and higher education. I am joined today by Kim Lindsay, who is the Principal of Auditing and Solutions for the public sector, as well as Mark Spaak, who is a Senior Manager with Security Solutions and VCIO with Raymond's Technology Solutions. Thank you guys both for joining us today. We're going to start this off strong with Kim. Within working with the public sector group, can you give us insight into what you're seeing in this landscape and the cybersecurity needs that are rising to the surface?
What I'd like to say, first of all, is that public education, and probably even more so now, higher education, being our colleges and universities, are not immune to cybersecurity issues that you see every day in business and maybe see on the news. Just recently, back in the fall or close to the early winter time period, we had two pretty good size intermediate school systems in Southeast Michigan, which affected probably 20 different individual school districts, that had a cybersecurity incident which caused school to be canceled for 4 to 5 days consecutively, and also huge amounts of, I don't know how much the cost was, but I'm sure they lost lots of data. I understand from talking with parents that live in some of the affected districts, their students couldn't even use their personal devices for about a month because they didn't trust that the cybersecurity issue had been taken care of. So breaches are out there. Just realize in the K-12 and higher ed realm, you have lots of personally identifiable information that's part of student records, addresses, everything else. And as far as college, probably even more things related to students, state aid, fiscal aid that they receive. So these issues are out there. They're growing. I don't know if there was ransom paid in that recent attack or not, but my guess is that is starting to happen as well. So just huge disruption when it comes to cyber security. And I don't think schools have been, especially K-12 schools, it hasn't been in their forefront as much as it probably needs to be. They are so busy, especially during this times we just came through with COVID, school being shut down, trying to pivot and do things virtually, which also causes all kinds of cyber impossible incidents. So just the awareness that schools need to have now that they are part of this problem, as well as the regular general public and other businesses, is probably the biggest thing I see right now as we look at the landscape for higher ed and K-12s.
I'll just kind of sound off on that, and I think Kim really hit the nail on the head. I mean, the number of records that these institutions carry just continues to be a honeypot for threat actors. They're looking for the biggest bang for the buck. When we look at 2022, the reported data, as we look globally, the average cost per record about $160, and depending on the record in the institution involved, sometimes it can be higher than that. So when we look at the street value of each one of those individual records, when we look at the number of records that those institutions usually hold, and then retention over term, right? So we extrapolate that out for the number of records for every school year that they have, those students, you can get up into hundreds of thousands of records. So it doesn't take long to really do a math, a quick, what we like to call a swag calculation, and just say, what is the amount of risk that these institutions are carrying? And so one of the things that, we're starting to see is, especially even in this quarter, we've seen a 77% increase. I was on a call earlier this week. We've seen a 77% increase in ransomware over this time last year. And so threat actors are starting to get back to business. There's been a lot of distraction with the Russia-Ukraine war, and threat actors are getting back to work. So, these entities, K through 12, higher education, they're in the crosshairs.
And I'll just add on there too, Mark. Oftentimes, especially in the K-12 situation, their technology may be housed partially at their intermediate school district or RESA, depending on how that educational agency is titled. Every individual school district, though, has its own risk. And when you talk with people at K-12 districts, they say, oh, well, the ISD takes care of all that. It's
Right.
all safe. What are your backup plans? Oh, that's all done by the ISD. Has it ever been tested? It's all done by the ISD. So
Right.
I think that the times of relying on the bigger entity in your county or regional area are probably over. You need to start thinking about what's happening in your individual district and what safeguards you have in place, what kind of training, all those kinds of things that I don't think school districts have thought about much, but really now are part of the equation every day.
Yeah. And, the last thing I'll add on there is that typically especially in that K through 12 space, budgets are squeezed. They typically have limited resource, limited staffing, and limited dollars to work with in their budget. So they're trying, oftentimes, I think what I see is it's kind of this pushing up mentality. I'm trying to convince, the school president and the different people at the board level of saying, hey, these are material risks that we need to be concerned about. These are things that we need to address. And they're having a hard time pushing that conversation upstream. And so the limited funding is definitely an area that's a challenge for many school systems.
Thank you both. Now, Mark, can you give us more insight into CETSEG and what this means for these higher institutions?
Yeah, absolutely. So CETSEG is an organization that is pretty wholly focused on the educational space. They are a property casualty company. They also do other services as well. But one of the spaces that they've been providing to a number of educational institutions is cybersecurity insurance. And really over this last probably 2 to 3 years, what I've observed is that CETSEG has been, I don't want to say relaxed, but they've been giving a grace period for many educational institutions to kind of catch up on their posture. So they're kind of giving this runway to allow the school systems to start assessing themselves, start to catch up on their policies, their protections. And I think over time, we're going to start to see more requirements start to enter in. But many of these organizations, many of the educational institutions are working with CETSEG on a regular basis. CETSEG does offer educational cybersecurity awareness training for its members. It is a membership. That's kind of how they function, how they focus on what they do. And so as being a member of CETSEG, you do get a number of benefits that come as a result of being part of that membership. So really their focus, and I think what we're going to see probably in the next year or two is a ratcheting up of really these baseline requirements. And this is something that we've seen in the commercial space. Many cyber insurance providers have been really increasing their baselines as far as what you're going to have in order to not only maintain, but even renew or acquire new insurance policies. And so I think there's a lot of change afoot there. And so many educational institutions are still playing a little bit of catch up and really trying to get in line with what CETSEG is going to be looking for as we kind of move forward. So there's been a lot of loss by the insurance companies. So they're looking at that loss data, they're looking at the trends, they're understanding how those losses came through forensic investigations when those situations occur. And they're encouraging the institutions that they support to make sure that they've got these baseline requirements in place to try to limit some of that risk exposure.
Yeah, CETSEG is the major player in the game for K-12s. I noticed I happen to do set in as a finance manager for a school system right now through one of my outsourcing arrangements. And I did notice that when the renewal came up for the cyber insurance, the application went from a partial page to a few pages, and I assume that will continue to grow. At this point yet, I've not seen the requirements like for things as basic as dual authentication, how people get access to your system and do they have to dual authenticate, all those types of things. I've also seen it I'm at another public sector client. And when I went through the renewal process with them this year, the application grew to 9 pages. It had all kinds of things that only the IT director would be able to have even a clue on how to answer. And we ended up, because we had a vendor spoofing a year ago that that cost us a small amount of money. Could have been a lot more, but we caught it very quickly. That whole cyber insurance piece, we increased it tenfold as far as our coverage, and we had to basically go out to the open market. And actually, I think the insurance may have come from overseas, the actual underwriter of it. So depending on risk that individuals and organizations see, we may see the landscape change on even how the cyber insurance works, how much coverage you're going to get, all those kinds of things. So once again, I think you're very right on, Mark. I think because they deal with so many entities as far as like K-12s and such, this is a big shift. It will require districts to work closely with their providers of their email systems, their accounting software, their student database, all those things, which SEG will probably, I'm sure, require many things to happen and certify to, so that when a claim comes up, if you didn't do what you said you were going to in the certification, you may or may not get covered. They're a very good organization. I'm sure they'll try and cover everything they can, just because it's in their best interest as well. But if you're just totally lax, you could have issues if you do have a real breach.
Yeah. And they absolutely are, starting to ask some of those basic questions, right? Do you have multi-factor authentication? Do you allow remote desktop services? Are you doing some kind of, security awareness training on a regular basis? What is your backup platform? Is it offsite? Is it air gapped? Do you have an incident response plan? Do you have a disaster recovery plan, business continuity plan? Has it been tested, right? They're starting to ask a lot of these questions. And it's actually interesting. You mentioned the 9-page attestation statement. I've seen those longer attestations. I've actually even seen some insurance companies now that are just sending over a 1-pager, and it's just got like 5 basic questions on it. And if you can't check all of the boxes on that page, then they just stop the process. You're not even a client they want to work with, and they're not going to invest the rest of the time to process your application. So it's very interesting how those things are changing. And I think, one of the things I mentioned earlier is that school systems are, they're squeezed financially, they're squeezed on budget, right? So how do school systems get these things in place that insurance companies are looking for? And it's like insurance companies have really almost overnight become the regulators of the commercial and K-12 spaces. They're basically saying, guys, you've got to raise the bar here, right? And so what I've actually seen is I've seen school systems band together with their ISD and start to create consortiums and basically go back to these providers of these tool sets and say, look, guys, hey, if we can negotiate good pricing here, I've got all of these school systems behind me that are going to buy into what we do here. And so they're leveraging and using the power of consortium to negotiate on pricing and really push these tool sets and these vendors down on price so that they can get these things in place. So, I've also seen other insurance entities that also will even put together grant programs. And as part of some of the fees that they collect, there's some that are also investing dollars into a grant program to help their municipality, whoever they're working with, to say, hey, let's get some of these things in place. We will help you implement security awareness training. We will help you implement Duo MFA. And they, in some cases, have $1.5 million, $2 million sitting in a grant fund, just waiting to help organizations get these things in place. So we're seeing a lot of that change, a lot of creativity. And it's like, how do we solve this issue so that everybody's kind of moving toward the same standard?
Thank you, guys. So this has been a lot of information. It's been great. Before we wrap up today, just based on all the information that we have delivered, what is one step that those listening or reading can do? And what's the one thing that they should be doing today is our takeaway?
Here's my one takeaway. I come from things from the finance side because I audit and I've been a finance director at a school system and such. This is more than just the finance department's issue. The district has to band together. They have to know where they stand with stuff. So if you, quite frankly, the district that I work with doesn't have a IT director. Larger ones will. So depending on what your structure is, between the superintendent, the finance department, the technology department, and then whoever the providers are, you have to get in the room and talk to each other, and you have to figure out where you stand, actually do a SWOT analysis, figure out where your strengths and weaknesses are, and then actuate a plan to get those weaknesses taken care of. Some of them don't cost any money. Some of them do cost money, but they all require communication. As soon as you go from having from no authentication to multi-factor authentication for everybody in the organization, that is a big change. So you have to preface that. You got to tell people it's coming. You got to do some training. And then I'll let Mark throw in his big point.
Yeah. So I think where I'd probably jump in is really understanding where you are as an organization. And Kim hit the nail on the head. It's about people, process, and technology. And this issue is not just a technology issue. This is an issue that's owned by the entirety of the organization working together. And, you know, one of the principal tools that I'd probably recommend for every institution to get out there and do, which is 100% free, and it's only an investment of time, is to go out to the Center for Internet Security's site. They have a new framework out that is version 8, okay? And they have what's called CIS CSAT. And you can go out and you can self-assess your organization and walk through what is called implementation group 1 controls. When we look at the breach data of the last couple of years, if organizations just focused on implementation group 1 of that version 8 framework, we would have defended roughly about 85% of the attacks that we saw. That is a very significant number. And so when we talk about what cyber insurance is looking for, all of those things are right in IG1. And so I would encourage you, go out, register, get a free account, and self-assess yourself. Look at your policies, take an honest assessment of your organization, look at your policies, look at what you're actually doing. And what you do is you start to build your baseline and you say, okay, this is where we are. Now, how do we improve from here? And there's individuals like Kim, myself, that we can work with those organizations to help them improve that posture. But a great way to start is to know where you are today and what are the gaps? What are the areas that we need to shore up that are going to make sure that we are the smallest target possible in our space?
Thank you, guys. This has been an amazing empowered chat. Thank you both for your participation. And if anyone has any questions or would like to speak to them directly, their contact information will be below. Other than that, I hope everyone has a wonderful day today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Christina.
Thank you.